to understand Nissan, they need to understand our story. So our job is now to tell our story in a more compelling and interesting way.
There's been a lot of talk these days, Simon, about the effectiveness of advertising versus some of these emerging communications channels, such as blogging, for example. And you have at your disposal this massive communications arsenal. You have all these different means of communication with all these different stakeholder groups that you mentioned. What's your perspective on the importance of advertising versus other forms of communications these days?
Well, I mean, the mix is absolutely changing. Now, it's not the same in every market around the world because consumers consume messages in different ways. But I think as a general comment, the mix is shifting away from the traditional advertising more onto peer-to-peer communication, more onto consumers and stakeholders generating the news and talking directly to each other.
Right.
So the credibility of the message coming from the company is under threat. And let's face it, on an average day-to-day, we're all bombarded with thousands of different messages, whether we're walking down the street, whether we're watching TV, whatever we're doing, there's always a kind of message coming at us. And I think consumers are becoming very adept at filtering that noise out. And so our job, you're absolutely right, is across the communication arsenal that we have to use is picking the right tool to send the right message to the right stakeholder. So it's becoming much more tailored. I mean, you can no longer do the shotgun approach. You have to do much more of a rifle shot approach to communications, which is more time consuming and means that you have to tailor your message in a much more careful and considerate way to each stakeholder group. Because people will react very negatively if you send them the wrong message. I mean, that's obvious, but it's becoming more and more important now because not only are you wasting your time and your resources, but you may also be causing a negative effect on consumers. So getting that message, getting the right message to the right channel is now the challenge. But the mix is absolutely changing.
There's a lot of rhetoric these days around the blogosphere, and some people are saying that the old days of top-down command and control corporate monologue are numbered. And they're saying that this new peer-to-peer communication, this more horizontal approach, where credibility comes from conversation, not from control, that's the new thing that companies have to look at seriously. Do you think that's a passing fad, or do you believe that that's something that companies like yours have to really seriously deal with?
Oh, I think we have to we are trying to deal with it. I mean, and it's interesting. It's not only external, but it's internal. I mean, it's all stakeholders. We look at if I use the example of employees, which is I think an area of communication that often companies neglect, but it's very symptomatic of what's going on in the communication environment. Outside of work, we're all employees of corporations. We all blog, or we may go onto social networking sites, or we're onto YouTube, or we're using a myriad of different communication channels to talk to our friends, our relatives, our peers, etc., etc. So we're doing that in the outside environment. Internally, the traditional model has been kind of the newsletter and maybe the company intranet site with the messages coming down from on high. And I think that's changing. I mean, we now have to give employees the tools to enable them to talk to each other and for them to generate the news as much as the company giving them messages. So it's interesting. I mean, the internal communications is really a microcosm of what's going on in the wider communication environment. And I absolutely see it is more peer-to-peer. It is more about someone like me, someone I trust, providing me with news and information, credibility of source. I mean, large organisations, whether they're government or corporate or NGOs, are under attack all the time in terms of their credibility and trust. So, how do you create trust with your stakeholders? Well, you do it through ambassadors to your brand. You do it through people that are going to be advocates for your brand, and that gets down to individual people. I mean, we've all had experiences where we ask somebody, was that restaurant good, or did you enjoy that last flight on XYZ airline, or is your new car good? And we put a lot of trust in what we hear from people like us, from friends, relatives, or peers. So from a communication point of view for a big corporation, we have to get right down to the individual. You know, I mean, we have mass communication, and there will always be a role for mass communication, but it's got to fit with much more of an individual communication field.
Now, there are opportunities, clearly, with this new form of communication. But there's some risks as well. If you look at YouTube, for example, if somebody puts up a 10-minute clip about one of your vehicles, and they're raving about how great it is, or if it shows the vehicle doing interesting or fun things, and it's consistent with the lifestyle that you're trying to promote, well, that's got to be a wonderful development.
Yep.
But if somebody has a problem with the vehicle, or somebody doesn't like it, if they try to smear the vehicle or the company reputation, that's got to be a definite risk factor.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that risk that is out there today in this blogosphere, where essentially, because of the democratization of the media, there's thousands, if not millions, of additional media outlets to watch and to monitor?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, you always say it's the consumers that you hear complain are the best ones, because you've actually got a chance to deal with them.
True.
It's the consumers that leave your brand without telling you that is the real concern, because you never know why. So, in a sense, the consumer has always had the ability to complain, and complain publicly. I'm saying in the old days, 10 years ago, you ring your local newspaper if you've had a bad experience with a product or service, and you can ring a consumer organisation, or you can take direct action. I mean, in the car business, if somebody's unhappy with their car, very often we've had instances of they'll park it outside the company's headquarters, and they'll put banners up, and they'll make a noise that they're unhappy with your product or your service. So, the fact that consumers complain and seek publicity for their complaints is not new. What's new, as you said, is the way in which they're doing it and the speed in which they're doing it. So our job and our challenge is how you interact and how you deal with them. Now, if they go out on YouTube, or if they post a negative blog, or if they create a website that's attacking you, at least you have an opportunity for dialogue. You may not win, but at least you have an opportunity for dialogue. So, the challenge, I think, for us is, do you react to every single complaint, every single person that has a grievance against your company? In an ideal world, yes. Practically, you can't do that. So you have to pick the ones that you think are the most serious, or have the most valid complaint. But you also have to work on a way in which you're not being run around by bloggers, because there's a lot of stuff on websites and blogs which is also conspiracy theories and kind of nonsense, and people just seeking attention.
Right.
You got to have a filter, and that only comes through experience. And I think we're all finding our way. I mean, it's a little bit of it's a new area. Consumers are discovering the power of this new medium. Companies are discovering the power of it, but also the threat that it poses. And I think we're learning all the time. But clearly engagement or finding a comfortable level in which you can engage with consumers through the new media is the challenge. And I don't think anybody's got it right yet. I think we're all still learning.
So, Simon, under the communications umbrella at Nissan, for which you are responsible, we have media relations, we have CSR. We've talked a little bit about the first two, but the third one might be investor relations. That's under your remit as well. What is it like to perform the investor relations function for a famous global brand that is headquartered in Tokyo that trades in Japan?
Well, I mean,